In the spring of 2024, Lucas and Marta Granger bought a 1920s Spanish-style home in the Silver Lake Hills of Los Angeles. They were newlyweds. He was a music video editor. She worked in costume design, and the home seemed like the perfect blend of charm and quiet eccentricity they both craved. The listing mentioned that the house had belonged to someone famous, but their realtor was vague. Only after the papers were signed and a neighbor leaned over the fence to chat did they learn. "Oh, you didn't know? This was Paul Reubens' house. Pee-wee Herman." They didn't mind. Marta had grown up watching Pee-wee's Playhouse. She actually found it sweet. The house still had original tile, stained glass, and quirky built-ins that felt like a stage set. The place had personality, just like him. The first couple of weeks were idyllic. Light poured in through arched windows. At night, the city sparkled below. They joked about hunting for secret compartments or a talking chair hidden somewhere in the attic. But then things started to feel a little off. It began small, subtle. One morning, Lucas woke to find the vintage record player spinning on its own. The vinyl was static. No sound, just soft crackling. The record was not the one they had left on the night before. Marta swore she hadn't touched it. The next evening, while unpacking boxes in the den, she found an old bow tie red, a little dusty folded neatly inside an otherwise empty drawer. "Was this here before?" "I don't think so." They laughed it off. Probably left behind by a previous owner. Maybe even Paul himself. They put it on a shelf like a relic. Then the lights began flickering. Not just random surges, timed pulses, like someone was flipping switches rhythmically from the wall. And only in one room, the front sitting room. Lucas, who had started working from home more often, began to feel uncomfortable in that room. He said he always had the sensation of someone watching him. Not malicious, but curious. One night, while editing at 2 a.m., he swore he heard a high-pitched giggle, quick, like a cartoon sound effect, and it came from behind him. He spun around. The room was empty. Marta had taken to using the upstairs guest room as her sewing space. One morning, she was adjusting a mannequin in the mirror when she caught sight of a small, sharp shadow flicker past the doorway behind her. She turned. Nothing. Later that week, they invited a few friends over for drinks. One of them, a cinematographer named Danny, asked an innocent question as she came out of the bathroom. "Who's the guy in the little suit? I just saw him go into that room." Everyone froze. Lucas asked what she meant. "He had like short pants? Red bow tie? Maybe a little old? I thought it was one of your neighbors dressed up or something." No one else had seen him. That night, Marta had a dream intensely vivid. She was sitting in the house's breakfast nook, and across from her was a man in gray plaid, with slicked back hair, smiling politely. He asked her if she liked the show. She said yes, and he leaned forward. "It's not over yet." She woke up with the words still in her ears. Feeling unnerved, they began to research more about the house. It turned out Paul Reubens had bought the place decades ago and had kept it meticulously private. Few people ever visited. He reportedly had a room filled with memorabilia, scripts, costumes, puppets, all locked away behind a hidden panel upstairs. Lucas eventually found it. A narrow crawlspace concealed behind a bookshelf. The latch had been painted over. Inside, it smelled of cedar and dust. There were boxes of old tapes, fan letters, props. A small dummy version of Pee-wee sat propped against the wall. Its plastic eyes, cloudy with age, seemed to shimmer in the flashlight beam. They didn't touch anything. But after that day, the house changed. The power surged more often. The record player would play warped voices backwards. One night, they both heard piano music drifting through the house, music that wasn't theirs. And then the dummy was found moved. It had been in the crawlspace. Now it sat in the living room armchair, facing the window. No one could explain how it got there. They contacted a spiritual medium. Not a dramatic one, just a woman named Reini who had worked with film people before. She walked through the house slowly, touching walls, pausing in certain rooms. After an hour, she said softly, "He's not here to hurt you. He just never left." This place was his cocoon, his stage. It was where he felt the most like himself. They asked if he was trapped. "Not trapped. just nostalgic. Rini performed a gentle clearing ritual. She lit sage, played a soft chime, and read from a paper. After that night, the house quieted. Mostly, the flickers stopped. The music faded. But the bow tie remained on the shelf. The dummy, they decided, would stay in the crawl space. They closed it back up and painted the latch. But sometimes, when the city lights flicker outside the window and the wind rattles the old glass, Lucas swears he hears something just below hearing level. A giggle. Catchphrase. I know you are, but what am I? And in the mirror, for a split second, just a flash, Marta sometimes sees the outline of a man in a tiny gray suit, smiling. Always smiling. It rained rarely in Silver Lake, but when it did, it came without apology. Thick drops pelted the red clay tiles of the roof, rolled off the stucco curves of the facade, and carved muddy rivulets down the narrow walkway beside the house. It was during one such storm, 2 weeks after the visit from the medium, that Marta noticed the scent again, unmistakable, drifting through the hallway like a memory forgotten but not erased. It was sweet, synthetic, almost childlike. Bubblegum? No, not quite. It was the smell of plastic. Old vinyl, perhaps. Faint and artificial, as if it had been sealed in a box for decades and was now slowly breathing itself into the air. She had been in the dining room, reorganizing a set of antique glasses they'd inherited from Lucas's aunt, when the smell struck her. Not strong, just enough to tug something in the back of her mind. Came with no draft, no movement. The windows were shut tight against the storm, their wooden frames swelling ever so slightly from the damp. She followed it, not intentionally at first, but like a sleepwalker, into the hallway, past the front room with its cold hardwood floors and curtainless arched windows, toward the stairs. The upstairs hallway was dim, even during the day. One of the bulbs in the sconce had flickered out weeks ago, and neither of them had bothered to replace it. Too many other things to do. Too many small mysteries piling up around them like unopened mail. The air grew colder with every step she took. It wasn't the HVAC. They hadn't even used the system since moving in, not with the breeze that usually swept up the hill. No, this was the sort of cold that pressed close like a glove turned inside out. At the end of the hallway was the crawlspace door, the one Lucas had found behind the false bookshelf. They'd painted over the latch, just like they said they would. But now, in the low light, Marta noticed something that made her stop completely. A fingerprint. 4 of them, actually, in the paint. Small. Not childlike, but not adult either. Almost like a puppet's hand. She blinked, leaned closer. The smudges weren't new. Or maybe they were, but just faint enough to avoid attention until now. She touched them. The paint felt dry. Behind the door, something settled. Not loudly, just the faint sound of a box shifting under its own weight or under something else's. She stepped back. Downstairs, Lucas had been asleep on the couch, lulled by the drumming of rain and the static warmth of an old blanket. The television was on but muted. An old black and white film played, a silent one, with exaggerated gestures and flickering frames. He didn't remember putting it on. He stirred when the air changed. That was the only way he could explain it later. The air changed. Felt less like a room and more like a set, as if the space around him had been constructed just minutes before, flimsy and too perfect. The lighting in the living room seemed different too, cooler like moonlight, but the windows were shuttered. He sat up slowly. His back ached. Somewhere a record was spinning. That's what made him fully alert. They hadn't played a record in days. The player was in the corner under a stack of books, but he could hear it soft, wobbling, like an old show tune, a piano loop that struggled for clarity. He approached the record player. It was off, unplugged. Still, the music played, and from the hallway he could swear he heard footsteps, light, deliberate, coming from above. Later that night, they sat at the kitchen table, the house dark except for a single lamp overhead, casting long, soft shadows on the tiled floor. They didn't speak for a while. The rain had stopped, but the silence it left behind was heavier than the storm. Finally, Lucas reached for his phone and tapped open a browser. "I think we should look into him more," he said. "Paul?" Marta asked, her voice low. He nodded. Not just the public stuff. I mean, who he really was. What he did here. What this house was to him. Marta looked toward the hallway. The smell of vinyl had faded, but she still felt it in the back of her nose. "It's not malicious," she whispered. "I don't think he wants to hurt us." Lucas looked at her, then down at the table, tracing a small chip in the ceramic with his thumbnail. "No," he said, "but I think he wants to perform." Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The following week was quieter, unnaturally so. No more laughter in the dark. No more shadow play or ghost-smudged glass. Even the scent had gone. It should have been a relief. Should have felt like balance returning after a strange tilt. But instead, it left Marta with an ache. Like the silence that follows an unanswered phone call. Lucas spent more time online. Research, mostly. Deep dives. Not into Paul Reubens' Hollywood legacy, not the red carpet Paul. Not Pee Wee Herman the icon, but the man in between. The private figure. The one who lived behind shuttered windows and frosted glass. Who kept his house like a vault and rarely opened it to anyone. He found only scraps. A quote from an old interview. "I collect memories the way some people collect toys. Carefully. And in secret." A neighbor, long dead, had once said the house felt like a dollhouse from the outside. Too perfect to be real. Marta, meanwhile, began to see subtle changes in the way the house behaved. At first, she thought she was imagining it, but it grew harder to dismiss. The morning sun didn't hit the walls the way it used to. The hallway seemed to stretch farther than it had before, just enough to feel it, never enough to prove it. Rooms whispered when she left them. Not in words, but in the sound of movement. The hush of dust shifting where no one had walked. And the mirrors. There were several in the house. Original to the 1920s build. Irregular, with spotted edges and antique glass that slightly warped reflections. She'd loved them at first. Now she couldn't look into them too long. The reflections didn't seem delayed, just off. She caught herself in the living room mirror one evening, paused in the act of folding laundry, and watched her own reflection still staring back, unmoving, even as her arms dropped the shirt. The tapes arrived in a cardboard box. No return address. No note. Just a sealed, brown package left on the doorstep one gray afternoon. Lucas brought it in and opened it on the floor of the den. Marta stood nearby, arms crossed, unsure. Inside, VHS cassettes. 9 of them, each marked in smudged red marker with a single word. Act I, Act 2, Act 9. They looked decades old. Lucas stared at the box like it was radioactive. Marta walked over slowly and picked up one tape. She turned it over in her hand. No label beyond the handwritten title. No production markings. Just black plastic. "Do we even have a VCR?" she asked, half joking. Lucas didn't answer. He stood up and crossed the room, pulled aside the lower panel of the built-in shelving. Behind the decorative slats was an old AV cabinet, worn, dusty, but intact. And sitting inside, untouched for who knows how many years, was a VCR. Not just any VCR. It was plugged in. That night they watched the first tape. The living room was dark, save for the bluish flicker of the screen. The sound came through the old TV speakers, tinny and distant. Opened with a static shot of the same living room. Their living room. Same shape, same archways, but with different furniture. A 1980s aesthetic, loud colors, strange shapes, cartoon-patterned wallpaper. Paul Reubens sat in the middle of the frame. Not in full Pee Wee regalia. Just him. Gray suit, slightly rumpled. Hair neat but slightly out of place, like he'd run his hands through it too many times. He smiled at the camera. "Welcome to the beginning," he said softly. Not his Pee Wee voice. His real one. Calm, measured, tired. "This house is a theater. Every room has played a part. Every corner holds an audience." The camera remained still as he stood up and walked out of frame. The screen stayed frozen for 20 seconds, then cut to black. That was it. Lucas didn't sleep that night. He lay on the couch, the VCR still humming faintly beneath the screen. He stared up at the ceiling, trying to connect the dots. He didn't know what disturbed him more, that Paul Reubens had recorded these videos in the house. like some private performance art, or that someone had sent them here. To them. Who was watching whom? Upstairs, Marta dreamed of laughter. But it wasn't human. It was mechanical. Pre-recorded. A laugh track with no punchline. A performance without an audience. She woke at dawn and found the dummy in the hallway again. They had sealed the crawlspace, painted over the latch, placed boxes in front of it. Yet there it sat, cross-legged, propped upright against the wall, its head tilted, arms resting in its lap, like it had been watching the door, waiting. Marta didn't scream. She didn't even touch it. She just whispered, "Okay, we see you," and turned around. They watched the rest of the tapes over the next 4 nights. 1 tape per night, always after dark, always in silence. Each ACT unfolded in the same room where they now sat like time had been filmed from a fixed camera bolted to the wall. They saw Paul age in reverse, then forward again. Each recording slightly different. He'd speak at length, sometimes in riddles, sometimes in sorrow, sometimes slipping into fragments of Pee-wee's voice, but slower, like it was melting. "Every performer needs a stage," he whispered in ACT4, eyes locked on the lens. "But what happens when the stage is all that's left?" By ACT6, the living room wasn't just the backdrop, it began to change with him. One wall was painted bright red. Another was covered in strange children's drawings, amateurish yet deeply unsettling. Stick figures with excess for eyes. Bright yellow suns that looked more like leering faces. In ACT7, he performed a short puppet routine using props that weren't there before. A table had appeared. Curtain too. But when they paused the tape, those objects didn't exist in their version of the house. And yet, the shadows on the wall matched. Lucas began sleeping in shorter bursts, never for more than an hour. Marta stopped going upstairs altogether. The mirrors up there had begun to reflect things that didn't exist. A lamp that wasn't turned on. A picture that had never been hung. At one point, she watched her reflection reach for her shoulder when she hadn't moved at all. The dummy now appeared nightly, never in the same place twice. They threw it out 3 times. It always returned. Once soaking wet from rain though the night had been dry. Once scorched down one side as if it had been through a fire. Once it sat with its legs neatly crossed in the middle of the kitchen table. Its glassy eyes always looked toward the stairs. By the 8th tape, Marta stopped watching. Lucas stayed behind in the dark, eyes glassy, mouth slightly open. He rewound certain parts, over and over. In ACT8, Paul's voice was weaker, tired. He didn't speak for long, just a few sentences. "I wanted to preserve it, this joy, this space where laughter never dies. But it only stays alive if someone keeps watching." "So you're watching, right? You're still there." A pause. "Good. Then let me show you something new." He stood, walked to the camera. The screen flickered, distorted. And then for just a second it wasn't Paul. It was Lucas. Same clothes, same posture, but unmistakably Lucas. He stared directly into the lens, and even though the screen buzzed with static, Marta could hear him whispering something. Something she couldn't make out. Something meant only for Lucas. He didn't speak after that. Not to her. Not to anyone. The 9th and final tape came with no video. Black screen. Just sound. A low hum. Then, faintly, the sound of footsteps echoing in a large empty space. Like a theater. Wooden boards creaking. A breath drawn in. A single clap like a director starting a scene. Then a voice, Paul's voice, but thinner now. Hollow. "They're here now. The new audience. And the show must go on." That night, Marta packed a single suitcase. She didn't wake Lucas. She couldn't. He sat in the living room, lit only by the television's soft blue glow, staring at the screen even though it had long gone dark. He didn't blink. He barely breathed. She looked at him one last time and whispered, "I'm sorry." Then she left the house. She didn't go far. For weeks, Marta lived in a motel off Sunset Boulevard. Cracked ice machines, cigarette-stained curtains. A place where the walls were thin and no one asked questions. Every night she dreamt of the house, of the laughter, of that synthetic, too-sweet smell. Vinyl and old carpet. Childhood memories stitched together like a funhouse of the mind. She watched the news. Nothing ever came up about Paul Reubens' house. Nothing about Lucas. Nothing at all. Until one day she saw a real estate listing. For sale. Historic Silver Lake home. Charming. Unique. Film history. She clicked the link. There were fresh photos. Updated floors. Neutral tones. New furniture. But one thing caught her breath. In the background of the final photo, barely noticeable, reflected in a mirror behind a newly staged couch, sat the dummy. Head tilted. Eyes shining. Waiting for its cue. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.